So, good morning. Hopefully you're all caffeinated and feeling perky. I always feel like I don't think this is a graveyard shift. I think the graveyard's probably after lunch, so apologies whoever's got that slot. But I know you're probably all hungry, but hopefully the next half an hour is going to be interesting. So, let's start with a show of hands. How many of you believe that sales training works? Ooh. So that's probably about 40%, maybe 50 actually, which suggests that 50% don't. So if you don't agree, who would like to be brave and tell me why they think that sales training doesn't work? Yes.
I actually had my hand up first time. I think sales training does work, but sales training is information. Oops. Sales training is information. We need coaching to make transformation. So put the two together, we get enablement.
Love that. Love that. Thank you. Thanks for sharing. The reason for me asking the question will become evident in the next few moments, because this presentation is the story of the last 7 years, and that's the 7 years that I've been with the Getty Images organization. So a bit about us, because as I was discussing with Mark earlier, people know the name Getty Images. They don't always know what it is that we do, even though the clue's in the title. So it was set up by Mark Getty, the Mark Getty, and his colleague Jonathan Klein 28 years ago. And what we do is that we produce visual content. And that's visual content that then ends up being used in print media, on TV, in films, and basically any means by which customers want to communicate to their customers using the visual world. When it comes to enablement, we have a sales and customer service team of about 600 people, and the team that I lead, who are responsible for enabling them, is relatively small. Again, it's a very consistent message across the presentations that I've heard this morning and probably yesterday. We're constantly moaning about being under-resourced, and it's our job, all 6 of us, to support that team. And I'm here today to tell you that, in my opinion, sales training doesn't work. Or at least it doesn't on its own, which is to the point that you just made. So I know it sounds like a bit of a sweeping statement, but I think sales training alone has limited value. And if we're talking about in-person, classroom-based training, the impact beyond the sort of standard Kirkpatrick level 1 happy sheet is relatively limited without attending to the full employee life cycle. So by that I mean the kind of people that walk through the door, how we onboard them, how we then test what they've learned and what is stuck in their heads, how we then do additional training post-onboarding, particularly on the job, and then what we offer in the way of career development and performance management, and what you do to ensure that your sales leadership, from the very top of the house, have a clear understanding of what good looks like, are aligned on what the change process will need to be in order for us to be able to get there, and are committed to and are willing to support the work required to get to that point. And there's a lot of ifs and buts embedded in that statement, because they might talk a good game, but oftentimes the reality is somewhat different. So in thinking about how you ensure that your sales training or your sales enablement program has real teeth, let me take you back to 2015. So you will have heard the saying, don't run before you can walk. Well, in my experience, before you can walk, you really, metaphorically speaking, need to think about crawling. And that is indeed where I found myself in 2015. So the first recommendation that I would make to you is to really think about why it is that you've been hired, and think about what it is that you've been asked to deliver, and consider whether that is a realistic goal. So, for example, when I was hired, I was brought in to take responsibility for the EMEA sales team. That's about 150 people, and I was told that I was responsible for training them. I'm like, okay, just me. So it's really important, I guess, with that in mind, to consider what it is possible for you to achieve. As many of us probably do coming into a new role, I've been here for 60 days, what have I observed, report back to the business, and the first thing I said was, I can't do all of this, it's not realistic, because here's the list of things that need to be attended to. And it's tempting to think that we can do everything, but we can't. And I mean, even if you were prepared to work all the hours God sends. So I think it's really helpful to think of your role as being an internal consultant. So just as you would if you're an external one, you would go to the people who have the problem, you would work with them to identify what that problem was, and then you would diagnose a solution. And that solution might then have a number of phases, and that will take time to implement. The next point is, don't be surprised, no matter how experienced you are, and whether you have been in sales or not, and I'll come on to my view of that in a moment, don't be surprised if even if the people who hired you believe in you, if the people that you will see in front of you in classrooms will mostly sit there with their arms folded, unimpressed by your years of experience. I'm seeing nodding, so clearly I'm not alone. If I had £1 or €1 or $1 for every time somebody in our sales org said, oh yes, but it's different here, I would be extremely wealthy and probably could have retired. And as I said to those people, and as I continue to say to them now, whether you're selling cars or toilet roll, or in our case, licensing content, the sales process is largely the same. So I'm not buying it, basically. But it is really important also to remember that context is everything. So if your business is performing well, as ours was, if reps are hitting target, as ours were, if they are of long tenure and consider themselves to be very experienced, then, as was the case when I joined the organisation, and continues to be the case in our organisation, then you're going to need to tread carefully. You don't want to be stomping in, appearing to suggest that they don't know what they're doing, even if that might be what you have been told by the person who hired you. Which is why, and I think Nikki said it earlier, I really recommend starting with why, as in, why have I been hired? Followed quickly by what, as in, what are the problems that you're facing? In what areas are your team struggling? Then followed by, okay, so how do I help you? And it's just as you would if you had been in sales. It probably would be a similar conversation that you would have with a customer. You know, and as it is important with any other support function, really important that you deliver or you develop allies elsewhere in the business, work with subject matter experts to be able to leverage them when it counts. So, of course, you need to develop relationships with the sales leadership and with reps. And again, if you haven't come from sales, then maybe it isn't mandatory. It's certainly helpful in my view. If you haven't come from sales, then getting out and spending time with the reps and understanding what they do in real life in front of customers is absolutely indispensable. And then the allies within HR business, or HR with talent acquisition. In our business, there are two separate teams, business analytics, another team. If you can look at, for example, the job profiles in your business, look at what managers are looking for when they hire. One of the things that was always on our job profiles was must have industry experience. And I remember coming in and going, really? Really? What, we don't back ourselves to train people on the industry? Would you not rather have a salesperson with the right attitude and the right mindset? Still a battle I haven't won, but I continue to fight it. So the kind of people that you want to bring through the door, if you could influence, for example, the kind of individuals that are being hired, maybe by inserting yourself into the recruitment process, also is super helpful. Because it means then that your training can have optimal impact. I mean, if you've got people who have been hired and you're sitting there, or you're standing in front of them thinking, this person is never going to be a successful salesperson, you may as well bang your head on a wall as a trainer. And then with regard to analytics, you know, I asked lots of questions when I joined about the leading indicators that we were measuring in our business, and actually at the time, we weren't, which made it really difficult to then be able to look at how I could prove an ROI for the training and the enablement activities that we were delivering, because those are the ones that as enablement professionals, I believe we can impact. So a couple of years on, and we are now walking, albeit somewhat unsteadily. So I guess if I was to think back to this time, again, it would be to be really consistent and be true to yourself about that original strategy that you built and you set for yourself and you articulated, while picking your day-to-day battles. And again, I think Nikki and Rohan talked about it. You've got to prioritize ruthlessly because, as it would appear, we've all got finite resources. There's only so much that you can do. So, even if you think a comprehensive overhaul is needed, I think it's really important to meet people where they are. And so in our business, that meant focusing on functional onboarding. So we have a separate L&D team that does enterprise onboarding, but there was nobody really looking at how we brought people into the organization. And frankly, it was a bit of a mess. And so the managers had identified that was an area that they wanted help in. So that's where we started. Also really important to make clear where or what you can do with your available resources. So keep underlining there's only so much that you can do with the people that you have in your team. And I flagged that we needed more people. And I kept saying it, and I was a bit like a stuck record. And by 2018, finally, the business was convinced and we were given permission to hire people outside of the UK. And as we've alluded to already this morning, for me, I think having been in sales is really useful. I appreciate Rohan's point about, my slides have just disappeared. I appreciate Rohan's point about you will be unlikely to get the highest performing rep into enablement because financially they're going to have to give up a lot to do that. I would also argue that the highest performing reps are not always the people following the best practices. So it may not be a major loss. What you probably want is somebody who has been in sales, and again, I think as Rohan said, is coming maybe to the end of their career or has just decided it's all too stressful, and actually they really like hanging out with people and coaching them and developing them, and that's really okay. So in my team, I've got somebody like that, and then I've got a couple of other people who actually are not that, weren't that long into their careers, were successful salespeople, but just wanted to coach and develop people. So I think, from a recruitment perspective, it's just really important to identify what it is that you're looking for in the people that come into your team. And then consistency. So consistency across regions is really important. So we have teams now in EMEA, APAC and AMER. And, when it comes to creating content, which we do entirely in-house, what we try to do is to co-create, because what we're trying to get is some kind of a global consistency. And I think irrespective of whether you're operating across regions or globally in our case, making sure that you've got a view of what success looks like and that everybody is bought into that means that then when you get to the creation of content stage, you can nominate and own it, but everybody inputs into it. Not only that, but it means that you then skip the trainer step because everybody's co-created, they know what's in the deck, and then they're confident to go and deliver it. And then aligned with that more tactical approach, I think it's super important to continue to keep sight of your long-term goals. So we have now a globally consistent 3-week onboarding that combines in-person and virtual and on-the-job elements. But we have continued to insist on that long-term strategy and what that should be and what that would then require in the sense of additional resources, continuing to reinforce that the impact would be greater if only we had more people. It would also be greater if we had a consistent approach to hiring, career progression, performance management. I think it was Rich was talking about the development of managers, the coaching, a learning platform. The list was fairly substantial at this point, in order to optimize our success. And then again, probably a phrase that would not be unfamiliar to anybody in this room, ruthless prioritization, because you literally could come to your desk every morning and be bombarded by 25 things that you need to do today, which will then derail all the things that you had hoped to do today. For me, the priorities are really in 3 key areas. Relationship building, again, it's been mentioned several times this morning already. So assessment in the field. It's all very well managers telling you the sales reps do X. It's all very well reps telling you we do X. I would really strongly recommend that you trust but verify. In other words, go see it for your own eye or through your own eyes so that you have a sense of where the gaps are, what the baseline is and where the gaps are and what therefore are the opportunities for improvement. Bearing in mind, of course, that you will also have to massage plenty of egos because in our business, super long tenure, everybody's very experienced, they all know what they're doing, and so I don't need your help. And you don't need to come out and meet customers with me. And the number of times that people forgot or meetings got cancelled, it's lengthy. So you have to continue to assert the need to go out so that you can understand how the business works. Of course, you're also watching how sales reps operate, but it's really critical to see how they do it. Otherwise, as I say, you could find yourself just taking things at face value. Second thing is the communication around subject matter experts. So making sure that you have a relationship with them, which means that you can then leverage their services when required. The third thing is standing meeting with sales managers. Again, what's going on with your team? Who are the strongest operators? Where are your problem children? How can I help? Talked a little bit already about content creation. And then training delivery. So training delivery, it depends. I mean, some of you will be buying in services. In some cases, you'll be creating it in-house and delivering it. The important point, again, for me, and this is a mistake that I made, don't lean too heavily on the best practice part. I mean, of course, you need to, but you've got to align it also to examples that are relevant and pertinent to the business that you are responsible for. Otherwise, what you'll get, which is what I got, which was a lot of pushback, oh no, but that doesn't work for us. Or that's not an authentic version of a role play. And of course, then your credibility is impacted. So now we make sure that we're not backing away from the best practice because it's best practice for a reason, but we also then align it to a live example from a customer call, which we can verify as such. And then being able to tell the story of your department. Again, you're trying to build an internal brand here, maybe not ostensibly, but it's useful to have it. And so keep coming back to the why. If you can articulate your purpose as an enablement professional, if you can tie this to questions to managers such as, and then again, I think it's been mentioned already, what keeps you up at night? Or maybe more importantly, be able to tell them what ought to be keeping them up at night. You're building your credibility as somebody who can add value to the sales organization. I mean, for us, it's sales and customer service and customer success, but I'm talking in the broadest possible sense. And then don't feel that you need to do it all alone. Most of us have got really small teams, and it's important to leverage the subject matter experts, as I said. What I found when I joined the organisation, though, was that the subject matter experts might be expert in their topic. Most of them were utterly terrified of the idea of being asked to go and present to the sales teams because they usually sit there with their arms folded, looking kind of threatening. So what we did was we worked with the subject matter experts to build their confidence, helping them over the hump of, it's going to be okay, I promise. Sometimes, in fact, more often than not now, we co-deliver the sessions, so we facilitate, we'll ask the questions, we'll point people out, we don't allow the tumbleweed for too long. So the pressure is taken off the SMEs, and what that then means is when we need a favour, we get them, which is quite a lot of the time. And then, I mean, again, this is kind of holy grail for enablement professionals, right? So working out how you show that you've been successful. But if you can tie your interventions back to whatever those measures are, then again, so much the better. Now, it may well be for you, as it was for us at the time, that we actually didn't have any real way of showing because the systems and our LMS was so rudimentary, but it didn't mean that I didn't have a good sense of what I would like to have measured had I been able to, and about which more in a moment. Which takes us to 2022. So here we are, 7 years later. And I can say, truthfully, hand on heart, there were times when I never thought we would get to this point. So it's taken a lot of persistence and a lot of resilience to deliver against some of the challenges that that I encountered when I joined the business 7 years ago. And a lot of that has only been implemented in the last 6 months. And, you know, at the risk of, again, sounding potentially controversial, part of it is thank you, pandemic, because some of the things that we've done in the last 6 months have been forced on us because of the pandemic and because we're now working in this hybrid, non-office-based universe. So I guess the first thing I would say is don't be surprised if your program takes a while to establish, because ours has done. But if I was to look back and say, well, what are my conclusions at this point? I think the first thing is layering your enablement. So start with the things that the business says are a priority, which in our case was onboarding. Once you've got that first program underway, you can move on to other priorities. It's also important, of course, to remind yourself that what you have defined as priorities might not be the ones that the business has defined as priorities, which again, to Nikki's point, means that sometimes you're just going to have to park it to one side and prioritize something that they have decided must be done today, bearing in mind that you're going to come back to the thing that you already had on your list. And I often, with the team, have this analogy of the plate spinners. I don't know if you know, the people who put the plates on spike and you're constantly doing this. And your job is just to make sure that the plates don't fall on the ground. They might slow down, but we try not to let them crash into 1,000 pieces. And so, as I say, for the last 2 years, 3 things really that we focused on. Number 1, sales knowledge. Number 2, sales coaching. And number 3, the implementation of a new learning platform. So the first thing, the repository of sales knowledge. So when I joined the business, it was the amount of sales information across a myriad of old classic SharePoint pages was horrific. I mean, horrific. How anybody was supposed to find anything, I don't know. Which is why we had lots of rogue. Lots of people going, well, I couldn't find it, so I made my own, which is deeply inefficient. And some of the stuff that was being presented to customers was horrible. So we have spent pretty much 2 years getting rid of everything that sat on those old pages. And we actually took them all out of Salesforce, out of SharePoint altogether, and put them into Salesforce. And for those of you that work with Salesforce, there's a thing called Salesforce Knowledge, where you can basically create a one-page article. And so everything that was on a SharePoint page is now a one-page article. And we talk a lot oftentimes about the difficulty of getting people to adopt new systems. This has been one of the easiest things to get people to adopt because clearly it works for them. So when we went live 2 years ago, we had 350 articles that were already written. As of a week ago, when I checked the data, we now have 700 articles, and we've had 360,000 page views, which I'm taking as a win. And the thing that, apart from the views, I mean, that's a win. But the other thing is that people are now coming to us and going, oh, I've looked and we need an article on this. Or this one needs tweaking. Or could you edit this one? Can we add a supplement? Happy days. This is literally user-generated content, which again is something that I think a lot of us aspire to see happen. The second thing, the follow-through, right? So this is why, in my view, training doesn't always work, because if a small enablement team like ours exists, we could not physically get around every single rep after a training and go, show me what you're doing with it. It's literally hit and hope. And you'll get a small percentage of people who go, yeah, I like that, and I'm doing it. And the rest of them will nod and go, well, that was fun. And then they'll go back to doing things exactly as they were doing before they walked through the door. So the follow-through is really vital. I think one of the challenges that we have is getting people to understand the difference between training, learning, and application, and also doing that with the managers. Because a lot of managers sit back and go, well, my people aren't doing stuff. And then we say, well, how much time do you spend with them in the field? None. Well, then what do you expect? What do you expect? So we went back this year to the original strategy of 2015, and right in the middle of the first page went sales coaching. It was there, we just weren't doing it, or certainly not in any formal sense. There were some managers who thought they were coaching, and again, it was alluded to earlier, not so much as it transpires. So we need to do the coaching part because we have to be confident that the behaviour change is happening. And it's I think, one of the only ways that you can evidence whether that behaviour change is happening. So follow through in real life, on the job, vital. And I guess the fact that we're going to continue to work in a hybrid way, certainly in our business globally, means that those opportunities for spontaneous overhearing that managers claimed they were leveraging in offices have now been taken away. So they don't even have that to lean on. And so we've actually been able to make the case. I hired a dedicated sales coach this year, and that has been a game changer because she's been the person who has spent time with reps in a formal coaching-led way and has been able to report back to the leadership and say, it's not good what I'm hearing. And because we're doing off-call recordings, we've been able to share some of those recordings with VPs who had reassured themselves that everything was going swimmingly because we're hitting the numbers. And they happily, or maybe not happily, are horrified because it's not good. Too many reps on autopilot, too many people not really thinking about having the customer at the heart of what they do, no preparation, lack of agenda, I could go on. But we have an opportunity, which is that now we have the evidence, and what we're now doing is that we have put all of our sales managers through a sales coaching program, and they are now accountable for coaching every single person in their team, reviewing one recording per person per month. You can imagine they're not all happy about it. In fact, there was one person, I mean, actually, I'm delighted they were prepared to say it out loud, but they did say, I don't see the need. I said, awesome, what about your people? What do you think they think? To which I didn't get an answer. So we're working on it. We're working on it, and I am confident that we will see improvements in 2023 off the back of this. And then the final thing is the learning platform, because so much of what we were doing, we couldn't evidence. We had a very rudimentary platform last year. This year, we've moved to a platform called WorkRamp. It allows me to check learning, do knowledge checking, share the scores with managers. It allows me also then to have them upload pictures and to review those. It is literally night and day compared to where we were. So going back to where we started, and I guess how would I summarize the last 7 years? Defining what good looks like, ensuring that your sales leaders are aligned and not being afraid to speak truth to power in a gentle way. Really important. Meeting people where they are, I've talked about. Being realistic about what you can achieve with the available resources and not being afraid to make a case for more if that is appropriate. Making sure that you are involving yourself in the other bits of the process, like the hiring and the performance management and the sales behaviors, post-onboarding, consolidation, making sure that you're combining the theory and the practice, deciding which of the training can be mandatory and which is optional. I mean, I really strongly believe that we shouldn't be sheep dipping everybody in everything. And that's one surefire way of getting people's backs up. So if you start with the need, or in our case, now that we've got this new fancy platform, do a knowledge check, we assess where the gaps are, and then we go, okay, so based on that score, you need to join us in this session. Or you did okay, off you go. And then, as a subset of that, making sure that they can differentiate between the enterprise and the functional learning. We sometimes, and again, I think it was on a previous slide, we get pushback, it's too much training. Like, well, some of that's not us. Some of it's enterprise, it's not negotiable, you got to do it. So let's make sure that you understand which bits we're directly responsible for, and the other part, you can have a different conversation. Differentiation between training, learning, execution, also super important. You know, it's one thing to learn, come up to whatever duration of a training program. It's another thing to actually commit to putting it into practice. And then the final thing, celebrate the wins. Can be a thankless task, I think, being in sales enablement. More often than not, we hear complaints. That's not right, don't like that, wish that was purple. We don't often get, thank you, that was awesome, and I really enjoyed it. So it's important to, metaphorically, or indeed in physical terms, pat yourselves on the back from time to time. And so, to go back to my first slide, I think sales training doesn't work unless you attend to that entire cycle. So as I say, what you ask people to do, how you get them to evidence it, and I guess most importantly, the follow through from a coaching perspective.